Hi, Benji. Hi, Matt.
Me.
Hey folks, how's it going?
Good. Good. Lots of people this time. When you merged earlier, one of the attendees, I was just clicking and then Benji merged. There are a ton of people that was.
It was pure coincidence. I just happened to check my GitHub notifications at that moment. Like,
yeah,
merge that.
Me too. I actually saw that Matt did something and then I was adding myself.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Let's see.
Oh, did I mess up the attendees? Sorry about that.
So this primary.
Hello.
Hello.
Was just setting up Zoom. Hi, guys.
All right, everyone. In the absence of Lee, I'll get us started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to February's GraphQL working group. By being here, you have agreed to the membership agreement, the participation and contribution guidelines, and the code of conduct. Links to all of these are in the agenda file itself, so please do have a look at those if you haven't already. Please also make sure that you are in the list of attendees in the same document. We'll go around first and do a quick introduction of attendees. That will be in the order that they appear in the attendees list. So I will get us started. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dennis from the guild.
Hello, this is Stefano.
I think you're up, Ivan. Irfan.
Hi, Ivan.
And I'm Matt.
Hi, Rob.
Wei from Meta.
Hugh wanted to say that he will join later today.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm Mark from Netflix.
I'm Benoit from Apollo.
Hi, Michael.
Derek from Apollo.
Uli from the guild.
Mike Cohen from Indeed.
Hi, Thomas from Stellate.
And over to you, Lee.
And hello all, Lee. I'm so sorry for joining so late, and thank you, Benji, for getting us started. I've been having some Wi-Fi connectivity issues, and I had to run and find an Ethernet cable. But here we are. So it goes. Technology is hard, right? And sorry, one sec while I pull my agenda file back up. Thanks everyone for doing the intro. Welcome. We have a very healthy agenda. And in the spirit of getting to that, actually, let's see. Yeah, let's just read over it real quick. So agenda items that we have on deck, an opportunity for me to talk about the election results from the TSC. We've got a topic from Benji and Ricky about managing our build and publish infrastructure, ambiguity and schema definitions, advancing argument name uniqueness, defer updates from Yvonne, and default value validation status check from Yakov. Anything that's not listed on there that we want to talk about? All right. Silence is golden. Cool. Let's do a quick recap of prior meetings before we dig into those. And I'm pulling up.
Whilst that's happening, would you be able to create the notes file for this meeting as well, please?
Yeah. Let me do that now. Sorry for missing that. I would say the thing that was most exciting over the last couple of meetings has been that we officially launched the scalars.graphql.org project. And so props to Donna in particular for getting a lot of that stuff put together, but Andy, of course, for getting the project up and running. And that is at scalars.graphql.org. It looks pretty nice. Andy's got a first couple of them up, but the idea is that anyone who wants to share broadly their scalar spec now has a place to put it. And 1 second, I will have our notes doc.
One thing I'd like to call out from the past two meetings, the non-primary meeting, because they tend to have fewer items on the agenda, it means that we've had actual like substantive discussion on defer and stream and fragment arguments, and having the higher cadence has helped those proposals actually like iterate and advance.
Yeah, we've made a huge amount of progress on defer and stream in particular over the last month or two. In no small part because of having the extra time to dig into them, but there's also a sort of smaller subcommittee that got set up to go deep into that, I think on a weekly basis, which has been really fantastic. There's just like a lot of really deep things to work through. And Rob, props to you for showing leadership on that and keeping progress. All right, I've got a link out to the notes doc and I will edit it into the agenda for posterity as well. We don't lose it. Those are the major highlights. I think there isn't a whole ton of other things worth talking through. Actually, that's not true. I think the other one that's worth really citing is the fragment arguments proposal from Matt has gone through sort of, I think, various rough and dirty phases over the last year or two, and Matt's got it cleaned up into like a very compelling state to move forward. And so, Matt, I'm sure you're continuing to work on that a fair bit, but we got to have a really healthy discussion about that at the last, which secondary meeting is that?
Yeah,
the APAC one.
APAC one, yeah. The one announcement there is like it's in a state where review is useful and probably not like it won't be a waste of the reviewer's time.
Super cool. I'm going to skip action items for the sake of time and dig into first agenda item. So first, election results. My apologies for running our process a little bit behind schedule, but we did, in fact, have a successful election with, I think, 10 nominees with a bunch of open slots this time. Only, I think, one person running for re-election, which is Andy. We did in fact get reelected, but then a whole bunch of new faces. So QA, I see you here. Welcome. Congrats to you. Rob, I think you were on that list as well. Congrats to you. And who else is here for the first time? Who was added in? Yuri is also in. I see you there. And then who am I missing? Steven, who's not on the call. Fantastic set of folks. Very excited to have your support and leadership, and thanks to everybody who nominated themselves. And the best part of the TSC is that we do the bare minimum of stuff and delegate heavily to the working group, so everyone can continue to share a fair bit of leadership. But it's always great to have a set of folks who can help run these meetings, maintain our repositories, and anytime we do need to take a vote on things, be able to do that. So thanks everybody for participating in that. Any questions or comments about the TSC election stuff? All right, sounds good. Next up on the agenda, Benji, management of build and publish infrastructure.
Hi, everyone. Thomas is with me today, standing in for Ricky. So what we wanted to talk about here, and this might particularly be a TSC topic because it deals with the technical configuration of, GitHub and GitHub Actions, NPM, and all those other such things. We have, up until this point, done what is necessary to make things happen, rather than what necessarily would have been, the best path. So, for example, quite a lot of the graphical build infrastructure was dependent on personal NPM tokens and things like that, which isn't ideal going forwards. It was fine and it worked until it didn't. And due to a recent security incident, we needed to revoke some tokens, and that has built some broken some build steps and so on and so forth. Ricky has outlined what they think would be the best approach going forward. But of course, we can also have input on that. Thomas, as you're more familiar with what's actually going on in the build steps there, would you like to say anything?
Yep, as you said, I can always maybe some color. It's basically currently we're using change sets for because there's a lot of different packages in the graphical repository, not just graphical but also the VS Code plugin and a lot of dependent packages. So we're using change sets to manage all of that, and all the release to NPM is currently depending on Ricky's tokens. And currently, part of that is broken as the current token isn't able to publish some of those packages, which basically what kickstarted this this discussion that we're now having.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't have much experience in setting up this kind of broader build infrastructure. Does anyone else have that and have a particular route that they think we should follow? Also, has anyone read through Ricky's proposal, which is quite short, and have any input on that? I've linked the gist into the chat so you can have a quick read.
Can support this use case because when I tried to push new version for relay, I forget how this repository called, but relay wrappers for GraphQL.js, I discovered that nobody in Foundation have tokens to it, and it required some help from Meta side. Meta helped me to obtain them. So I think since we have especially now, since we have multiple projects and some of them is a legacy project from Meta, and some of them stuck at some stage, and maybe in the future somebody wants to renew them like a parser. We have C or C++ parser for GraphQL. I don't know, maybe somebody wants to maintain it or do at least bug fixes. But at the same time, I don't know who have access to it, or who at least can share access to it. So it's a minimum, I think, having one user that has access to all the repos and packages, and somebody from Foundation having access to it and being contact point, meaning if somebody wants to get token for something, he can send the email to a responsible person at like foundation, and this person can give away tokens. I'm like, I don't know about like one password, never actually used it, but at the minimum, I think we should have like user and have like either GraphQL Foundation or TC members access to those keys, maybe both. I don't know what's the better solution, but I think even this step will achieve like 80% of like solution, even if it's not fully automatic. But there is like responsible person, and there is like you know for sure that if you write to that person, you can get tokens. This would be like great solution.
Yeah, I wonder if it is also worth us doing an explicit for all packages owned by the foundation, do like explicitly have somebody like we identify at least 2, ideally 3 owners who have permissions, and maybe it's through this mailing list, maybe it's through all TSC members, maybe it's whatever it is, but then require each of those people, or at least 3 of those people, to do like a minor version bump and release, even if it's like a no-op release, just so that like I remember having to release, I think, or having to bump GraphQL JS once, and it was a disaster because it was the first time I'd ever tried to bump a version of anything on GraphQL JS or on NPM. So basically, if we don't actually exercise the path, then there's no guarantee it will work.
Yeah,
That sounds
excellent. Great input. The other thing to factor in is some of our projects, particularly graphical, I think, use automated publishing. And that's where the 1Password / 2-factor authentication discussion came in. So having a solution there that we can be secure with and know that, you know, it's not going to leak those tokens to the wider internet and things like that. If any of us TSC members have particular experience in doing that, I've always been too cautious to put tokens up on there. That would be beneficial.
I certainly think the GitHub Actions auto deploy is going to be the like best balance between security and convenience, because it means any local project maintainer just needs to do, they just need to actually do the mechanic of doing a version bump, and then the actual deployment happens in an automated fashion, and they don't need to worry too much about token management or MFA or anything like that. It's a balance because it means anyone who is capable of changing the deploy, like the version field in a package JSON file, can then therefore do a deploy for that particular project. But I think the alternative would be that the only way to actually deploy a version would be to find a TSC member who has MFA credentials, and that's more secure, but more burdensome, and it may slow us down in terms of our ability to deploy stuff. It also avoids the whole shenanigans of like, how do we share a 1Password install between maintainers, and not having to do that would be very good.
So what would be the course forward from here? Is there anyone who'd be willing to own this topic? And because I seem to understand at the moment that there are graphical releases that are pending. We're kind of in a bit of a broken state where some things can be published, but not others. So it would be ideal to get this sorted soon.
Is there, okay, so there's, I think, the correct outcome, which is what is being pitched with this gist. And I'm happy to own that piece in terms of like getting the appropriate foundation generic NPM and GitHub accounts set up and get the credentials in the right spots. Is there a short-term thing that we need to do specific to GraphQL that unblocks its ability to deploy today? Like, can we undo whatever we did that stopped it being able to deploy to, like, so we're not blocking? Or is that just too burdensome to figure out? And instead what we should do is use GraphQL as the canary project to test out this new flow?
I think the short-term solution to get GraphQL publishers up and running again would be to have a token that actually has all the necessary permissions, which could, in the until we get the user set up, which could again be a personal token. We just would need somebody who has access to all the relevant packages to create the token.
All right. Which is probably me.
Speaking of which, Lee, I think you gave me and maybe some others access to some of the packages, but they, among those, didn't seem to be the packages under the @GraphQL scope. So it may not have been caught under the same umbrella. And I think that's where the sort of split in permissions has gone awry. So I currently do not have sufficient access, is what I'm saying.
Got it. If you send me a list of the ones that I missed, I will go through and add you to those. And then I'll take it as an action on me to get this plan going. That way we can have, yeah, we can have the, I'll get it to the point where we've got GitHub token and NPM token keys in the appropriate place so that the GitHub action will do the right thing.
Fantastic. Thomas, if you can help me follow with that, up with that after the meeting, that would be ideal.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I imagine the 2 or 3 of us may need to just like get on a separate call at some point just to make sure that it actually works the first time, and because it doesn't always, and if we've missed something, then it'd probably be good to just have some block of time.
I think we're good to move on unless anyone has anything else on this topic.
No, thank you for finding it and a good detailed proposal. Next up on the agenda, Benji is also one of yours, but this is about fixing ambiguities when schema definitions are omitted.
Yes. Okay, so this is one that we discussed previously, and there was a little bit of discussion around the actual terms that we used, but other than that, it was pretty straightforward, I think. This all came out of Roman's research from reading the spec carefully and noticing some inconsistencies, and then me noticing further inconsistencies based around those. So this clarifies, or I say clarifies, it technically changes what the spec is actually saying, but I believe it changes it to what the intent of the spec is, rather than what it actually says right now, which is basically if you're using the default root operation type names, like query, mutation, subscription, then you don't need to put the schema keyword in your spec. But if you are using different names for those operations, or if you're using one of those names and it's not meant to be used for the operation, for example, you have mutation that is meant to be talking about like a viral mutation rather than actually the mutation operation type, then you must put the schema keyword and say query, and then obviously not put the mutation in, or put mutation some other type, something like that. So this is what this PR clarifies. It's not very many lines of code, or text, I should say. So yeah, I was just wondering if we can progress this a little bit, because I was asked about a related question in chat the other day and realized it wasn't matched yet.
That latter piece is in fact a meaningfully different change that seems like the right one, well aligned with the intent, and was probably an oversight. This change seems super straightforward to me, and I think we should do it. But I do think we should make sure that some of our most used implementations, especially GraphQL.js as reference, encodes this behavior. I don't feel super strongly about blocking the change to the spec based on that, but I do want to make sure that we don't lose sight of it. Like, is it useful to hold this open just as a flag that says we are waiting for a PR against GraphQL.js to ensure that this behavior is appropriately in place?
Michael, you're a maintainer of an implementation. Have you had any issues with this one?
Sorry, I was not following. With which one?
So this is the schema keyword in the SDL.
No, we didn't have an issue with this one.
Cool.
I suspect there won't be any issues. I think likely that where the change needs to occur is when you print a schema SDL out from a in-memory schema. There's a bit of logic that decides whether or not to print that schema definition bit. And I think right now it only does the first part, which is it checks to see if your schema mutation or query mutation and subscription types are default named, and then it decides whether or not it omits. But there's an important extra bit, which is it needs to then also check to see if those default names exist in other types. So in your particular example of a schema mutation, you have mutation as a type that exists in your schema somewhere, but you're not talking about GraphQL mutations, then we need to be clear that like it is not safe to assume that that is the mutation, GraphQL mutation type.
Okay, great. So I think effectively that code block that I've got in the top comment is effectively a test case. If you pass that and then print it back out again, you should get the same thing out as you put in. So if we can just basically send that to the relevant implementations and see if they have any issues. We've got the implementers team, I think, so I'll tag that on that issue and see if we get any feedback.
Cool. I'm taking a specific note on that thread just so that we keep track of that.
By the way, I'm not taking very good notes, so if anyone can contribute to the notes, that would be beneficial.
One second while I write this down. Cool. Sorry for the delay while I type that up. Thank you, Benji. I marked this as RFC1 for now. Just, I think the draft text is probably correct, but just knowing that we usually hold draft for having the code elements in sequence with the spec element. That's probably the right thing. But as soon as we get that change in place, this one looks good to go. I think this is going to be super straightforward. thank you for picking that up and making it clear what the particular insight was that needed to get fixed.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Benji, you're on a roll in terms of agenda. You've got the next one, which is argument name uniqueness, which I believe is a follow-up from the last time we talked about this.
Yeah. We seem to have an issue in the spec where we didn't state that the arguments must be unique. This was brought up a while back, and I think it was generally agreed that this is the right direction to go. But I don't think we've seen the champion of this for a while at the working groups, so it's not been sort of pushed forwards. I'm not sure what the process is for this, but I think that we probably should do this. I know, for example, in GraphQL JS, when you look at the args, they are a list because that's what the spec says, rather than them being an object, which would be more convenient and things like that. So yeah, what is the process here of taking this forwards?
We'll just claim, if you want to just claim champion of this, then we'll make it so. I think we can just say that champion timed out and you're taking over. And it looks like Yvonne did the same on the code side. Thank you, Yvonne. And so that got merged actually for a bit of time ago. So this is just a matter of now the spec agreeing with where the ref implementation has been for a while.
Yeah, and I think it is pretty straightforward. So I think this is probably ready to advance.
Cool. Anyone opposed to calling this one accepted?
No, not opposed.
No, sounds good.
It is so. Thank you, Benji and Matt, for digging in and cleaning it up and getting it ready to merge. I'm gonna go ahead and squash it. Squash and merge.
Excellent.
That one's in. Thanks for keeping an eye on it. All right, the Benji show is over. We're gonna move on. Do we have Yvonne here today to talk about fully deduplicated responses?
Yes, I'm here.
There
Give me
you
a
are.
second to have had blackout, so we need to power up battery. Yeah, I will share a screen because I need to show some examples, and I think examples will make it easier to understand. So, do you see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what we agreed, I think like on last working group or one before that, is that we merging fields with initial response inside defer. So if we have like in this example, by the way, do you see my mouse pointer or not?
Don't see
When I
Yes,
move.
yeah.
Now we do.
It's small, but we see
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I don't know how to make it bigger, but yeah. So we have like field A inside defer. We have A and B. Obviously, we already ship A, so we can deduplicate it with B. So we all agreed on that, and it's kind of easy in a sense. Next step forward is we also agreed to basically merge all the defers into one, all the defer on the same level. Especially since we remove labels, now we don't have groups of defer, and everything matched. And it's kind of like makes sense from GraphQL standpoint, since fragments or inline fragments always like everything is merged into one response. Before GraphQL or before defer, everything is like merged into one response. So which follows the same idea. Next thing, things that Rob actually opened discussion items asking can we do that? It basically means like it's next level of deduplication. If we have like defer, for example, set defer, and we have like everything matching up except like a value. So you can do that, and it totally makes sense. Nothing is blocking nothing. Everything is kind of cool. So with like 3 examples of deduplication, they like straightforward. They like you can decide on them statically, and they don't create any problems. Next example, I took it from Rob issue in agenda item. I linked to like issue. If you want to see like issue and discussion, please click it. It's in agenda, or somebody can post it in the chat.
Ivan, if you don't mind, can you go back to the previous slide? I have a question about this one actually. Why did we decide to merge it this way? If you don't mind explaining it.
Yeah, because we cannot ship like inner defer until like outer defer gets shipped.
Got it.
So like in a sense, and if outer defer is already shipped, so client already get the ID, and basically when we drop labels,
I see what you mean. So this is the response, right? Essentially, the right side is the payload.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So you are not changing the query to rewrite the query to that.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah.
The query is equivalent. The right-hand side means that it would be the left-hand side result would be equivalent to if you were writing the query on the
yeah. Now I get it, because initially I thought you are rewriting the query, which more intuitively should be merged into one defer, and the list item should just have ID and value in it, right? So that was my confusion.
But there is a risk
Thanks.
But there is a risk, by the way, by doing that. Then if you run list twice, that you actually get a longer or shorter list.
This example, I thought that we said that list item would all be merged into one defer because they're both defers are under the same root object, right? They have the same path.
This is a nested defer though. So you have one defer.
Yeah.
So put your hand over the bottom half of the query first. So you're just looking at defer list item ID, and you're saying like, all right, I need to get the IDs of all of the items in my list. I'm deferring that. Additionally, and like within the scope of the deferred thing, I'm deferring the IDs and the values of each item. And so what we're saying here is, well, we already got the IDs, but if this is the case, we're deferring values, the result of this in terms of payload should be one payload, or okay, there's the host payload before you got to the defer. That contains whatever it contained. There's the first deferred payload, which has the list of all the item IDs. And then there's a later defer that has the list of all the item values. Did I get that right?
Right.
Yes.
Maybe I was misunderstanding what you were saying, but I thought that in the last few meetings, we wanted to basically treat every defer that was on the same path as the same defer and merge them together. Even though they were nested, they're still on the same root object.
You're right. We did talk about that. I think this is something that we should be able to provide control over, because it is the specificity is ambiguous. It is unclear from the query author whether they intended for this to be first get the IDs, then later defer to get the values, or whether they sort of meant this as like, there's just two separate things I would like to defer, and it is safe to batch them together.
I think problem Rob has run into on this is that you can't disambiguate whether you in the first response, whether the value item, whether list item value is part of the first payload, and like value is just unset because it's the wrong kind of object or something, versus like we're still waiting for this inner defer. Like there's no, because the path is the same, you can't actually disambiguate the two.
Yeah, by dropping the label, we wanted to have the constraint that you would only get one payload back per path.
But this what Ivana's explaining would work if the defer was inside of the list instead of just nested at the same level as the
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good that I added to this sample. I thought it's like I added it like quickly without too much thinking, like an hour ago. But I learned that my understanding is not exactly the same as everybody else. So we all agreed that stuff is merged into one defer per path. So it should be, in this case, it should be one defer with ID and value, right?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, yeah. So this one now I get how it should be. So next one, the one that tricky one that Rob added, and that's why I wanted to explain now. So basically, we're duplicating here. We're duplicating E and F. It's like in this case, nothing is embedded in anything, so it's like totally parallel things. So easy rows not working here. There is, at least I could not find like any easy row that rewrite query that save original intention of this thing being independent, but guaranteed that we don't duplicate fields inside the response. So in this case, solution for me, solution is not in rewriting query, but solution in response format. And by the way, I feel strongly about fully deduplicating fields. We discussed it. We discussed it on several like working groups, different specific working groups, and also on this working group. And solution we moving towards, since we abandon labels, we're moving toward like deduplicating more and more things, and like at least until now, like we discussed solutions that we deduplicate fields, but not all of them, and leave it to a server, and server can deduplicate or can like duplicate. So, and the most complex example I could find in all this discussion was this one. So I like tried to find a way to make it deduplicated. And by the way, we can discuss deduplication as a goal like separately, but first let's discuss what I'm proposing and see if it even solve an issue. Maybe somebody can come up with counter argument or better solution. So
yeah, and just in case it's not clear for everyone why this is like difficult to deduplicate, it's because it's the E and F fields. To optimally deduplicate it, you would have to know the order that potentially slow field A and slow field B resolve in. If that first defer is coming in first, then you want to include it. If it's not, then yeah.
Yeah. So we have like I decided since you cannot solve this problem, I could not solve it without breaking anything. I broke a rule that you have one payload per path, one incremental payload per path. We have this rule like forever. It totally made sense with labels, because with labels we preserve shape. If you specify a label on something, you're guaranteed to have like response with this label. But since we drop label, I thought like, what the downsides of breaking this rule? And so as a solution, we have like duplicating E and F here. And obviously after initial response, number one, we have number two, and number two deliver exactly that. And it's delivered in it under the most outer path, the shortest path, because like in previous example, shortest path kind of wins because it's executed earlier. So ENF delivered here, and now we have like just two incremental payloads with slow field A, slow field B, and GNF attached to slow field B. And we can deliver it like anyway, in any combination. We can deliver like one is number 3 and second is number 4, vice versa. And we can also batch it up, since incremental is array, and array preserve order. We can have like one payload have an ENF and slow field A at the same incremental, just as different items inside the incremental. One thing new here is completed field. We discussed using completed field for stream to know where stream is finished. And we will add it anyway for streams, so why not add it to defer? So idea here is you have initial response, you apply items from incremental as a patches to initial response in ordered manner until you get completed on particular path, and you know that this path completed. So merge tree stuff that is like you get number 1, merge number 2 into number 1, and merge like number 3 into that single tree. And by that point, you have like all the data to complete all the defers on path A and B. And important thing, completed here means all the defer on this level is completed. So if, for example, 4th payload delivered first with completed true, it's also correct, because it's mean like path, empty path is completed, and inner path can be incompleted because it's inner path and they will come later. So is it, did I explain it correctly and you get the idea? I'm especially interested because on this Monday groups about stream and defer, we discussed it like a couple of times, and especially interested if like new people understood that.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed the meeting, the last couple meetings of but I feel pretty strongly that given defer is intended for like the product developers to be able to state what data they're okay with waiting for, there's no point in giving incomplete deferred data. So there's no point in giving a payload that has a defer that is not completed. And it's better, in fact, to end up overlapping with a different defer. So in this case, if I did the EF potentially slow field A defer, and I provided the entire payload as payload number 2, then I can deduplicate out the ABEF and just provide GH and potentially slow field B, right? Alternatively, you could flip, and it could be that in the first update, it's ABEF, GH, potentially slow field B as a whole payload, and that's the second response, the first incremental response. And then the second response is just potentially slow field A with the path to it. Either of those are fine, because at that point, the response that comes back, you actually have, as a product developer, like your product that is waiting on this defer is actually complete at that point. Alternatively, it's even okay, in my opinion, to shove it all into the first payload and just say, okay, the whole thing is ready because whatever, we actually computing all this. But maybe it's that we should actually have paths plural, and like, oh, we were able to get potentially slow field A and potentially slow field B at the same time, and actually we can just shove all of this into one incremental response. I would prefer that as a product developer of, oh, we got both defers, they're both ready, so just give them to me now. But I definitely would not want that potentially slow field B data to be split out of the number 2 response. If that makes sense. So what we have on the screen, where the number 2 comes and is representing that lower defer, but that lower defer is getting split across 2 different payloads. That would be really difficult for me as a product developer to reason about how to deal.
Because you cannot do anything with your UI component, because you still have to wait. So it doesn't matter to me if I get this piece of data earlier, I still cannot render.
Yeah.
Okay, so question, just to clarify if I understand correctly or not. So basically you're saying it's okay to split it inside incremental. It's not okay to send something that doesn't represent any defer at all.
Correct.
Yes.
Or it's rather, it's not okay to split a single defer into multiple payloads, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, but it's okay to have like common part plus one of the differs inside 2 entries of incremental, but in a single payload, and have like second differs sent separately. Well, yeah.
I think it's
understand.
okay. Yeah, it's okay to say, oh, you already have all of the data besides this one field within this defer. So all we're showing you is this one field. And at that point, this defer path is complete. But it's not okay to say, oh, well, you don't know, like you have to look at this completed field to know whether I actually have given you all the data at this path.
Okay, so
I mean, the example is very technical, Ivan. Usually you have like proper fragments, and these fragments are actually your data for your UI component. Then it's easier to.
Yeah, so idea is here. First step of algorithm is batching everything on a path into one big defer. Even as previous example show, even if defer inside defer, we're still batching it into one defer, tied to a path. We don't merge defers between like parallel structures as shown here, but we can share responses between them, but we don't send like data that cannot complete any single defer by itself. Okay, now I kind of get it. Do you feel like we need this restriction in the spec saying server cannot send like stuff, cannot send like payload that doesn't complete defer at some particular path, or it's like just a logical thing that same servers will implement anyway?
I think it depends on if there's a prescribed algorithm or not. If there's a prescribed algorithm for this, I think that algorithm should preclude it. If it's like we just describe what is required, then yeah, we probably should have some, like, you cannot respond with partial, you cannot have a defer partially fulfilled.
That's also where I still am very skeptic about full deduplication, right? Because we are trying to deduplicate the data, but we are losing like the logical unit.
Yeah, this we've discussed a lot, I feel like, and I'm a little bit less concerned about the like allowing deduplication. Explicitly because we're treating defer as a diff, basically, as a patch.
Remind me if I'm forgetting. I think we had, because part of the bid to add this layer of simplicity was making label no longer something that we would require, because that was sort of an added set of complexity. And I remember having a conversation, I don't remember where it resolved, of whether or not we wanted to still allow label or something like it to be optional as a way to get back to controlling nested defers not being merged, right? Like you would not merge two defers that had separate labels. Is that something we've decided to fully take off the table, or is that something that's still interesting to follow?
Yeah, we decided to fully take it off with the workaround that you could use to achieve that. It would be wrapping whatever the parent field that your defer is in with a alias, aliasing whatever object is above that defer. That would cause them not to be merged together. And kind of like the real solution would be when we ultimately have alias fragments.
That makes
another
sense.
solution, which another solution to the same problem, which I want to enable with this change. Since now you can send multiply incremental per path. Basically, you're turning response into like initial response plus series of patches on top of it, and you guarantee that patches doesn't have duplicated data. They have like duplicated keys. You can have like A and B duplicated, but like no leaves will duplicate ever inside patches. Now, if we decide to return back to labels, what we can do is to just signalize like after this, instead of just having completed, we can list like have array of label names saying like these labels are completed. Important thing to explain how I came to this idea, and maybe it will help to clarify why this proposal of like basically treating subsequent payloads as patches, not like shapes of particular differs, but patches. It's because I spoke with Benoit, and Benoit showed me that in Apollo Kotlin, merging is already done. So like you get initial response, you keep it in memory a series of maps, in memory representation of JSON. And when you get like incremental, you patch with maps, and you have like single map per query. You don't maintain separate maps for every differ. So you have one global kind of not global, like per query JSON representation in memory, and you just patch it. And you need to do that even with current proposal, where you guarantee to have like only one incremental per path, because you need to merge it with initial response. So client already need to do this thing. Client already need to have a memory representation and code to match with JSONs. So from a client standpoint, we don't adding too much additional complexity. In my view, if we say like instead of merging one initial response and one path patch per path, you can merge like 2 or 3 or 4 until you get like completed true. So it's the same code, it's the same in-memory representation, and inside issue I describe that algorithmic complexity is actually lower when you don't have duplicated data. You do less operation of looking for a key in the map, so it's faster. So a question here, one is algorithm, how to implement that, and I like try to come up with implementation for this working group. I'm stuck on another issue, so I'm lagging behind on it, but I'm working. So I want to finish like GraphQL JS PR to implement that. So it's one thing is how to implement that. I think it's totally possible and don't add too much complexity, but I can prove it. I need to prove it with PR. Another big thing, can we break this rule of one incremental payload per path to allow full deduplication? So like we guarantee that nothing is duplicated now.
I mean, with the complete, we still can signal that a pass is complete, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
the one patch per pass was kind of to simplify, and we essentially know then, okay, this pass is complete. But with the completed value there, you can signal that. So
yeah. And we need this field for stream anyway, so it's not new concept. It will be already in the spec. In little bit different meaning. In stream, it's mean like array is finished. here it's mean like object is finished, but meaning basically it's the same. It's like this path is finished. In case of stream, path is representing array. Here path is representing object, same meaning.
And to be clear,
additional...
when we say that the object is complete here, what you actually mean is the object, this layer of the object is complete, not anything deeper in it.
Same as stream.
It means all the fields. All the fields that are under the defer at that path, not stuff that may be under an adjacent sibling defer.
Actually,
yes, but also not grandchildren.
Actually, it's even simpler. It's not all the fields under defer, it's just all the fields. Because initial response plus all incremental and was with completed mean like all the fields, all top level fields on this path is completed. And meaning is the same with stream. So stream means like all the item in array delivered, and array have like can be like subarray. And on this level, it can be another like stream. So meaning is same. Thing is finished on that path. One additional like not direct benefit. I know it's not what defer was intended to do, but what we discussed at some point inside Apollo, it's like, for example, introspection query results can be huge. And for some results, for some schemas, it can be like gigantuous and create a problem since not all the implementation can parse JSON. So like JSON that big. Browsers until recently, I think it was 4 gigabytes or something of JSON. So defer can work as like as a way to split it up and make JSON smaller, allowing server to split it even smaller chunks, allow like server to not have problem with memory bandwidth, meaning like if we, for example, C and D is like huge enough, it's already like hitting like some limit, you ship D to a client, and when you start like working on other fields. So as a side benefit, it's a solution for like resource constraint on the server. Server can decide like it's enough data for me to keep like for this client in memory, and I want to afford it to a client and work on another batch. Yeah, just wanted to mention it here.
So I have one more question about this, and I live in the JavaScript world, so I don't particularly care about the answer to this myself. It's more, I want to make sure it doesn't cause issues for anyone else. This is effectively moving towards the payloads being less predictable. The shapes of them, they may or may not have fields because those may or may not have been delivered in previous times. Currently, if you issue a GraphQL query to a server, you know what the shape of the response is going to be, like the spec guarantees it. And in this proposal, we wouldn't have that quite so much. Certain of the fields will now be optional, I guess, for what we would expect to be delivered. Is that likely to cause issues for any clients, particularly clients that are in, I don't know, strongly typed or even statically compiled languages?
Yeah, that's exactly a realization I had speaking with Benoit. I assumed like I had this idea for a long time, but I assumed it will create problem for strongly typed client. What I learned, we already create problem for strongly typed client by allowing to inline everything. and by allowing to, basically by allowing to inline inside the initial response and deduplicating things, which more or less the same. Deduplicated between initial response and inlining, the result for a client is the same. Everything becomes optional. Here, so what Benoit showed me, he already need to preserve in memory JSON, since you need to deal with inline. So you mark everything is optional. You still understand what field can be tied to particular path, but they're all optional, since like everything can be inline. Here, this proposal keeps the same semantic, because everything is shifted toward upper level differs. So you know for sure that E and F tied to empty path, not to A and B. It's just like when you get empty path, you not sure, everything is optional. So empty path have A, B, E, G, and so B, and A and B have like only so A, but everything is optional. And like this proposal doesn't change anything. Shape is predictable, knowability is non-predictable, but unpredictable knowability is the consequences of inlining stuff and consequences of deduplicating stuff. So this one doesn't change. And Benoit, you on the call, if I said something wrong, yeah, I think Benoit wanted to join. Not know.
Yeah, I'm here. No, I think you said it even better than I would. Yeah, that's correct. What you said in our case for Apollo, Kathleen, at least.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would solve this as a client, if we go with this structure, I would not even allow you to, like, the inline defers are their own methods in the client. So like you have to call something in order to access the inline spread, the fields under the inline spread. And I would just not allow accessing those fields until it's completed. So either my like access gives me null or gives me like a pending value. So in some sense, by enabling these split defers, I'm actually delaying even more my ability to render.
So I think to summarize is, ideally, it would be really great if we could have one payload per defer path, and everything is completely deduplicated, as in every payload you're receiving prior has all the fields you need for the next one. The problem with going in that direction is, how do we implement it in a way that is not like doing some kind of like more checks on the client? Our first thought was like, this could be done statically if you have a server that like normalizes queries ahead of time. But that's when we came up with this case where it's dependent on the order of how fast or slow resolvers are. Can't be done statically. I don't think that we'll be able to come up with an algorithm that fits into the spec text that could efficiently like figure out how to do that. So that's why like we're coming to this decision of, do we want to like be sure there's no deduplication by relaxing the constraint of having one payload per path and adding this completed field, or is it okay to allow deduplication? Okay to allow duplication. Sorry. Does that summarize it accurately?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's the decision that we need to make. I don't, not saying that we need to make it right now, but just.
This is a good thread to pull on. I certainly don't have a strong opinion. It does seem like it's waiting a bit between simplicity versus query writer's control. And that's the line you've been walking for a while. So we'll see where it takes us. Thank you, Yvonne, for prepping the details of the proposal and helping walk us through the ramifications. If Yakov is still here, then happy to use the last few minutes for the default value validation status check. Yakov, floor is yours.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm not sure I have the best connection, and that's okay, I think, because I'm just refreshing the group for the call to action in terms of reviewing the current implementation PR and Benji's point as well as to how it aligns with with his spec PR. There were some comments by Matt in terms of on the PR in terms of whether in the implementation itself whether undefined input values are allowed. If people want to weigh in on that. Other than that, we want to, I guess, get as many eyes on it as possible because Lee's work was great and complex. But I think still the way to go forward, despite whatever intervening changes have happened in the implementation, and just want to get as many eyes on it as possible.
Sweet. Let's consider that a call for action since we don't need to get the eyes on it in the next 5 minutes in particular. But you've got links there to the OGPR, the one that Yakov has very graciously got up to date on the latest state of the code base, and Benji's spec PR. Is it worth having a short conversation about the undefined bit? I don't know if I totally understood that flag.
Yeah, maybe. Matt pointed out that one of your code changes assumes that a input value cannot be serialized to undefined, and so that if it is undefined, it's not present. And he questioned, I guess he was questioning why, is that really true? The old code seemed to use like a has own property check, which seemed to imply that it could be that an input value, like a scalar input value, could be serialized to undefined. So I was looking through some of the other code and some of the other old code, and our existing. It looks to me like we can't, that we would actually throw an error somewhere else. So that was a safe change to make, a non-breaking change to make. But maybe somewhat curious that an internal value cannot be undefined. That's just not allowed. That's considered an error. Maybe a bit surprising, needs to be documented, but not a breaking change. I don't know if that rings any bells for anyone else.
I would say that it's not breaking change to a spec because it's JavaScript specific. From spec point of view, there is no undefined. There is no values, and it's okay to do breaking change for GraphQL.js if it's released as major version. So I would say it's big feature anyway, so it will maybe break something for somebody probably, and somebody use some weird hacks. So I would release it as major release of GraphQL.js and wouldn't do too much archaeology to find out how breaking it is for specifically for JavaScript implementation. I would say let's keep it. Intention for GraphQL.js was always to be easily replicatable in other languages. GraphQL Python is direct copy, and as far as I know, especially static languages don't have a difference between null and undefined. They don't have undefined. So I would say like for the whole GraphQL.js implementation has own property and undefined means the same. It's non-existing because it makes it easy to replicate into other languages that don't have like two different null values. So I wouldn't like put too much effort in it. Just like I think your solution is good enough. Just release we just release it on the major version and specify like note it may be breaking something if you had like weird scholars that serialized to undefined for some reason.
I'd also say to anyone implementing this spec in their own implementations in other languages, if you were implementing the previous behavior, this should be a major version bump for you as well, because it does concretely change how default values are handled. Hopefully with minimal impact, but there can be impact, especially if people have defined things in a way that was vulnerable under the old system. So definitely a major release for everyone, I think.
Yeah, we probably need to write some synopsis blog post that like gets into the nuances in a way that makes it clear to people who are using default values. Because I think they would see this and be like, this is a breaking change, why? And it's fairly subtle. That's pretty important, especially if it would cause a subtle change in behavior. On the particular has own property versus undefined bit, I pulled up the PR and noticed that we're using has own property in a couple of places. So I don't know exactly what specific spot the potential missing case was, but if anyone wants to go there where they saw it and then just put an inline comment and tag me, then I'm happy to go take a look. But I think first principles, I agree with everything Yvonne said. Hopefully this is just like a JavaScriptism quirk, and the goal is to make fewer JavaScriptism quirks if we can.
Yeah, I can't even find my own comment, so.
Yeah, I went looking for your comment and I didn't find it. So
I know I made it.
If you spot
I
it again, send it my way.
It's on the PR with preserve sources of variable values. Sorry, I'm away from the keyboard. You know, again, I don't think it's actually a breaking change in behavior. I think the old code also did not allow a scalar to have its internal value to be undefined. I mean, so it's just a question of why we actually were using has own property. And maybe in the rest of the cases, we need to check if we still do need to use it. But again, I agree with everything else that was said. It's just an internal quirk, and it's definitely a breaking change for the reason that yeah.
Yeah, and the only reason I was even able to make that comment was because I was trying to preserve exact behavior for fragment arguments. So I was also hitting this exact same code, and I was like, oh, I did this, I preserved this, you changed it. But if you've done the code archaeology to determine that, like, this may just be a behavioral thing from before we were using types at all in GraphQL.js, in which case, yeah, maybe the types are now accurate and it's not needed, which is a good thing.
Very much a good thing. Okay, Matt, if you happen to spot your comment, send it my way so I can take a look. But Jakob, what you said is probably true. The internal bit, it's not where we would find a breaking change. I think we'd find a breaking change potentially in aggregate of this whole stack landing. And that's the thing we should write against. Thank you again for getting that rebased and up to a healthy spot, and Benji for cleaning up the spec text. I will set aside a bit of time to go read through them, but my sense is that we're probably in a good spot to move this forward.
Do we have a
That's our agenda.
timeline or plan for that, maybe by the next meeting, possibly?
Yeah, before the next meeting. That's the action. Awesome. We are ending on time. Exactly. Amazing how that works. Thank you all for the good discussion. Welcome again, new TSC members, and we'll talk to you all in the next meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.